So, welcome to Enigmatic Consciousness. I'm here today with Lauren. Um, Lauren, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Uh, Lauren, 30-year-old female, into tarot, spiritual stuff, all that good things. There's crystals littered all over my house and, all that good stuff. I was living the oil and gas life for a while and then was recently laid off about 4 or 5 months ago. And I'm just kind of seeing where the spiritual path takes me. So, trying to build a business through that and running events. And I actually have my first one coming up on next Wednesday, the 26th. And it's all about stepping out of your mind and coming back into your body.
Well, I guess to start off, what was I'm guessing you had a point in your life where there was maybe a shift or something that kind of led you to take this path. How was that? How was that? What kind of happened with that?
Well, after university, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I went into oil and gas, very typical of a Calgarian. And I worked there for a little bit because I thought the definition of success was to make a lot of money, to own a house, to travel, and basically just not necessarily flaunt your wealth, but just be like, look how much I'm great. I have this prestigious job and I have this nice house. And then at some point, probably about my mid-20s, things kind of started shifting and I just became really unhappy. Because while some people are motivated by money, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, I realized I wasn't. And so being in oil and gas, and just maybe the job that I was in specifically, were just very money motivated. And so I became very unhappy because I was dealing less with people, more with numbers and technical work and spreadsheets. And I was just getting further and further and further away from what I truly enjoyed as a human being. So I started searching and I started trying to figure out what else was out there. And so I grew up Catholic, but it never really fit well with me. And so I started searching, well, I believe in something, I just don't know what I believe in. So I started searching for other things, and I started searching for, well, what do other people believe and what kind of other spiritual realms are there out there? And the more I got into it, the more it made sense to me of just having that freedom to believe whatever you want to believe. Like if you want to believe in fairies and elves and, Allah or the Quran or, whatever works for you, then great, go believe in it. I don't believe in indoctrinating yourself into one way of thought. Like I personally pull from many different belief systems because it's what works for me. So I started doing a lot of research. I started looking into tarot. I started looking into Reiki. Got more into crystals, candles, all kind of that more, what I like to think almost a sensual aspect, because I find candles very sensual. I find crystals very sensual. They're all tangible things that I can look at. And then I still wasn't sure which way I wanted to go. I was still working in oil and gas at this point. And then about a year, actually probably almost 2 years ago now, I started running women's circles. Because I was working with a life coach at the time and we were trying to figure out which direction to take my life. And I realized that I wanted more female friends and I wanted to build a female community and female connection. And because a lot of the times as females, we're raised to compete against each other as opposed to connect with each other. At least that was my understanding and how I was kind of my view of the world. So I figured, okay, I can't be the only one. There's got to be other females out there like that. So I started running women's circles about once a month. And it just hit home to me in a whole new way. I loved facilitating. I loved leading this group. I loved hearing about other people's experiences. And so I now am working more towards that path. And since I got laid off from my oil and gas job, it was kind of a blessing in disguise because I was going to quit eventually. Actually, later this year, I was planning on quitting. So then getting laid off in, I believe it was the end of April, was just the universe being like, Kate, and now's your time, out the door you go. So yeah, it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, everything just kind of seems to fall into place when we need it to. I find that very much with my own life. the more I tried to control things, the less control I actually had. And then you just kind of learn to embrace going with things. And even when you're in a place where you feel stuck and you don't want to be there, you kind of have to embrace that thought that it's temporary
Yeah.
and that it's going to change at some point. As long as you have the intent to change it, it will change at some point down the road. Um, so whether you feel stuck, and it's the same thing with if you're in a place that you're comfortable with and it ends up changing, it's the same kind of thing. Like everything shifts directions when it needs to, and um, I think that's great too. Like just trying to connect more with other women and finding people who have those similar experiences. But then like it goes both ways. Like you're getting a lot out of it, but you're also offering them something too. So it must be pretty there must be a lot of like gratification with doing that, right?
Yeah, I love doing it, to be honest. I love connecting. I love having people meet part of themselves that they didn't realize was there, or if they're holding on to things still and then they come to this circle and they're like, oh, I didn't realize I was still really upset about this, or I didn't realize that I was, unhappy with this. And I just think it's really cool because every month it's not like I even formulate a plan. I pick a topic and then I just let my intuition kind of go with the flow. So every circle is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how many women show up. And yeah, like I participate in other women's circles, so I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, and so it's all that interconnection of, yeah, connection over competition. And I love it.
Yeah, and there's a lot said for embracing that too. And I really liked what you said about the religions and not really sticking to any one thing and pulling from everything, because I do really genuinely believe there's something to be learned from everyone and everything that we encounter. So it's a lot of, I mean, it's kind of an ego trap, religion in itself, because you kind of get dictated towards this is what you need to believe. And it's hard because as a child, you're brought up with that, and your understanding of the world is only from your own experience. And as a child, it's very new. So you adopt your belief system very early on based on what you're told from other people. And it's a struggle, right? So it's really, yeah, keeping an open mind and learning from everyone and everything, and just letting yourself not be so critical of other beliefs. Like take what you can take away from it and leave what doesn't resonate with you.
Yeah, it was really interesting because for me, growing up religious and Catholic, it never made sense to me that it was male dominated. I didn't understand how half the population on average is female, and yet this religion is all male. Like, it just, I didn't realize that that's what didn't sit well with me for the longest time. And then it wasn't until I left the Catholic system and realized, okay, well, that's what bothered me. It's the fact that women are not represented. And just as I have now started coming back, because when you grow up one way and you disagree with it, you run in the complete opposite direction, and you're like, well, no religion ever again. Like, I'm going to be free. So I did that for 10 years or however long, and now I'm actually kind of working myself back. But the thing is, I'm working myself back into it in a new way. So I don't know if you grew up Catholic or in any sort of religion.
I did. I wouldn't say it was heavily enforced by my family, but it was like some aspects of it were, and then other as like I would say we were like half-ass Catholics in the sense where we um went to church once a year and I went to Catholic school, but aside from that, I wouldn't really say there was much practice of it beyond that.
So the part that's been calling me back to religion is in Catholic, there's Jesus, right? He's the savior. But Mary Magdalene, if you don't know who she is, she was the prostitute that Jesus healed and saved and cleared out 7 demons from her and all of this stuff. And she was there after his resurrection. But actually the church came out and said that she's actually his wife. And they had rewrote the narrative originally saying that she was just his prostitute and nothing else. And now they're like, oh, no, no, no. Actually, she was Jesus's wife. And I was like, how much would that have influenced religion if that was always in there? And actually, Mary Magdalene, she wrote a gospel. And I read that gospel recently, probably about a month ago. And it was fascinating to hear her perspective of Jesus and the way she talks about him and the way he talks about himself in this gospel is that he's 100% human and 100% divine. And I think that's really cool because he talks about that as all humans. All humans are 100% human and 100% divine. And so because of this, there's no such thing as sin, which blew my mind, right? Because that is how religion gets you, right? There's sin,
Yeah,
there's
like
guilt.
sin is that huge control tactic that they use and basically mold you into being a certain person by manipulating your behavior by deeming, this is good and this is bad.
Yeah. And so it's guilt is a huge thing for it, right? Well, don't be bad or you're going to go to hell. So then you do that one little bad thing and then you feel so guilty about it forever or however long you feel like you need to find forgiveness. But yeah, so it was really interesting to read her gospel and see that this whole new side of it that I would never even think about because it's not taught in the church.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of misogyny that goes with the modern Catholic belief system. I know it wasn't necessarily always that way, but things changed over time. It became more of a control tactic, and it's kind of good to see that people are opening up and it's maybe shifting back to that more wholesome direction of just being decent to each other and being kind to each other and being kind to yourself and connecting to yourself. Um, because the irony in kind of how it had shifted is that it really went from being connecting to yourself to disconnect from yourself and believe what I tell you. So I like seeing how it's kind of shifted back towards interconnectedness again.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because I look at the big picture of it all and how the divine feminine is now trying to rise and trying to get their place, and that's what society and the big buzzwords that are happening right now. But I think, especially in the Western world, we're so masculine driven and we're so focused on power and money and trying to be better than the other person that we forget just how connected we all are. And that's part of the feminine is recognizing that connection and the nurturing and taking care of each other. And so as that starts to rise, it's going to be interesting to see the world shift, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And especially I find here because I originally am from Ontario and I moved here and um, I totally agree with what you said about how money driven it is out here, especially with the oil and gas industry. And just I don't know, it was kind of culture shock for me because like I would say all of North America is very money driven, but like particularly out here, it's like if you don't have a job making $30 an hour, like you might as well, like your existence doesn't even matter almost is kind of like the mindset that you get from some people. And that's horrible in a lot of ways because society isn't built for everybody to be able to kind of make that kind of money. So to put someone's personal value based on a monetary value, like I've always kind of felt like that was really one-sided almost. I don't know. But it never really sat right with me. But I am definitely seeing like over the last few years, things have shifted out here and it's not the case anymore where you can just go get a job making 30 bucks an hour. It's not really it's kind of shifting in that sense of it's not an expectation, a societal expectation to be making that now from as many people as it was. Like I think people are kind of moving past placing their self-value on their wealth and not being so competitive about it because you can only be competitive until you have nothing and then you have to take whatever something is offered to you. Um, an example too, I was at a one of those like job placement kind of things. My ex-girlfriend used to work through them, so I would drop her off in the mornings, and there would be guys who would go in who were like, this was kind of when the oil and gas just started declining and people were just kind of starting to lose their jobs. But it amazed me how many people would go in and they get told, you know, this is your job for the day, and they would ask, how much am I getting paid, and they'd say something like $17 an hour, and then they would literally like almost throw a childish fit in the building and be like, I'm not working for that, this is BS, blah 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 blah. Like, they go off on the people at the counter. They're like, well, do you want to earn a paycheck today or don't you? Because if you don't want it, somebody else will take it. So I think people have really just had to kind of accept that things aren't as good as they were in that sense, and it's not as much of an expectation as it was, say, 5 years ago.
Well, and you look at it, like people work in certain industries, and not necessarily just oil and gas, but because they fell into it or they were pushed into it or they just didn't know where else to go. And then they end up staying there for 20, 30, 40 years because they become comfortable. And they're like, okay, well, I'm earning a steady paycheck. This is just my life now. You know, I have bills that need to be paid, and I understand that. But your happiness, your health, your well-being, your mental health. And I think also as we see mental health issues arise and we see people putting more value on those mental health issues, people are going to be saying, well, is it really worth making the 30, 40, $50 an hour if I come home from work and I'm depressed, or I drink myself into numbness, or do drugs, or party every weekend? Because, and if that works for them and where they are at their life, then okay, that, like, who am I to say that you have to live your life differently? But I also look at it and I'm saying, well, I don't know, this is a touchy subject for me because I used to be one of those people when I first started in the industry, and I'd be like, cool, I'm making so much money, let's go party and get wasted. So I understand that life. But then as I grew and as I developed as a person, I was like, there's got to be more out there than this. Like, I don't want to get drunk every weekend. And I look at some of my friends or people who are still in the industry or still living this life, and that's just their lifestyle, which I'm not trying to bash their lifestyle, but I look at it and I say, well, that just doesn't suit who I am anymore. I became unhappy and I was like, I can't live this lifestyle anymore.
Yeah, like for some people, like for, I would say for you and me both have this in common, that you just get to a point where you desire something more and it comes from within you, and you need to answer that call because, like, essentially you get forced into it because you just keep feeling more and more like it keeps weighing on you more and more, and you don't feel good, and you don't understand why you don't feel good because you're just doing what you've always done and you're doing what you feel is normal. So at some point you just have a turning point where you start seeking other things, like either you meet someone or you come across something that interests you. The next thing you know, you're sitting in a room with suns and moons on the wall, and you've got 500 crystals surrounding you, and you're like, I'm actually pretty happy with this. This isn't so bad. But yeah, what, like, I've noticed in you too, because I guess I've known you for probably about 2.5 years now, mostly through social media. But like, I've even felt like recently there's been kind of a shift in you. And that's kind of why I wanted to get on here and talk to you, just because like I can feel like your energy shifting, like even from your posts and what you're doing, and that like you're kind of changing direction and you're going through like a phase of growth. And that just, I can just imagine like that must be pretty exciting right now too, right?
It's exciting. It's nervous. Uh, you know, I was always back and forth growing up if I wanted to be my own boss or didn't want to be my own boss, because there is a comfort and a security in getting that job and saying, okay, I go in and I do this work and I get handed this paycheck. And then, you know, you leave work and you're like, okay, done. You go in, you get your paycheck, you leave, right? And so I was like, that's just so nice. And I can just, you know, do my Monday to Friday, evenings and weekends are mine. And that's what I tried to do in oil and gas, but I realized that that wasn't fulfilling for me. And maybe if I had gone into a different industry, it'd be different, but I somehow don't really think so. So Now it's really funny because about 2 years ago, I asked the universe, I was like, hey, universe, when it's time, please lay me off from my job and I will start my own business. And I waited and I waited, and I'm not a very I'm not a very patient person. So I'm like, okay, anytime now, like, why am I not laid off yet? Okay, fine, I'm gonna quit. Just give me a few, like 6 months, and then I'm gonna quit. So, but I think also the universe knows you best. It was waiting for me to sell my house because me as a person, if I had lost my job and I still had a mortgage and I still had bills that I needed to pay, I would stress hard. I would stress out so much about trying to pay my bills that I would just go and find another Monday to Friday job, and I'd find another salary job and just do that. And so I wouldn't work into putting my own business. So I put my house for sale in January, and then in April, I sold it. I moved out on a Saturday, and the following Monday, I got laid off. And I was like, okay.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. So it was literally like the universe knew that subconsciously I would not be okay if I had all these bills. So I'm living in my parents' house again, and that was kind of an adjustment for the ego side of me, being like, oh my God, I'm 30 years old and I just moved back into my parents'. But at the same time, I now have no bills or very, very minimal bills that I have to pay. And so it really gives me that opportunity to build my own business and figure out who I am and what I want to do.
Yeah, I totally get that because I actually just moved back in with my mom back in May. And like for me, so I had a decent job. I was making like 20 bucks an hour and I absolutely hated it. And I reached a point at the end of 2017 where I just really couldn't go to work anymore. Like I couldn't stand being there. So I literally, I don't know what came over me. I was on my way to work one day and I just decided, screw it, I'm going to quit my job today. I didn't have another job. I didn't have really any savings. And I took that leap and I just walked in and I said goodbye to the people I wanted to say goodbye to. And then I went over to my boss and said, hey, I'm leaving. I'm not coming back. And they're like, oh, are you giving notice? I'm like, no, like I have my backpack ready to go in the break room and I'm just letting you know I'm leaving right now. And they weren't too happy with me, but I really didn't care. So I left and I was really determined that somehow I was going to become self-employed. It didn't go well. Like I didn't have any form of plan. And in all honesty, the amount of effort to actually run a full-blown proper business, I just don't know that I have it in me to do that. Like I think I'd have to 100% have a plan and know what I want to do. And it really made me realize that like maybe I don't want to do like readings for people and stuff like that. So it was kind of a growing pain. And then I ended up with a minimum wage job. So I went from making 20 bucks an hour to making 13 bucks an hour, I think, at the time. And my rent was like 3 months behind. And I just ended up in this hole of like, how do I get out of this? Um, but it pushed me to do something that I'd refused to do for like probably 7 or 8 years, which was to go and get rid of all of my credit cards.
Mm,
So I went and I filed a consumer proposal. I got rid of all my credit cards. I got my debt condensed down from like 15,000 to about 4,000.
wow.
And I just pay it's like 75 bucks a month for 5 years and I can pay it off whenever I want. So it just comes out of my account. I don't need to think about it. And it's a lot less than the like $600 a month I was paying towards it.
Hmm.
Um, and then I just worked out an agreement with my landlord that I would pay them. I think I agreed to pay an extra 300 bucks a month for a year. So I got my rent caught up and just got myself really like back to basics financially. Um, because I kept getting higher and higher paying jobs, but I kept accumulating more debt. Like I really didn't have healthy habits with money at the time. So that kind of forced me to let go of that fear of the money and just go for something. And it was extremely liberating by the end of it. And, but I reached a point where I was kind of like, is it worth having like almost $2,000 a month in bills to pay when my mom and I are both living alone in separate places? we could just share a place. So we ended up renting a 3 bedroom townhouse that costs the same as what I was paying for my 2 bedroom apartment. And we've been cohabiting since May. And it's been good. And yeah, I struggled with that at first too. I'm like, I'm just about 30 and I'm moving back in with my mother. Um, but once you kind of get past that and you, especially a couple months into it, and you realize how much less the financial strain is and how much more freedom you kind of have with that, because you know like for me, I do have like a minimum wage job, but I don't need to worry about having 40 hours a week. So I can work 3 4 days a week and I'm still making enough to pay my bills, and I have time to do a lot of the other things I want to do too. So it's been like finding a balance of cutting back in my life and just getting to a point where I can choose, like, not having, not being so dependent on money for, the sake of living with a parent, and just kind of getting past that mindset. Because there is a lot of pressure for young people to kind of have their life together by 30 for whatever that reason is. Like, it's, you're expected, like, you finish high school and then, you finish college or university in your early 20s, and then, you're expected to have a 6 figure income and a house and a family by 30 years old. And it's just, it's unrealistic nowadays to expect that of people.
Yeah, I can relate to what you were saying for sure. I think part of it, there's a few of us, few people that know right from the get-go what they want to do right after high school or university. And then there's a few of us that have no clue what we're going to do after high school. And I was one of them. I had kind of a basic idea that I wanted to work with people and I wanted to be of service to people somehow, but I didn't know what that looked like. So I just followed, my mom was in oil and gas. So it was just kind of natural for me to be like, okay, that's a known industry. And so that's just where I went because I didn't know what else to do. And I saw the lifestyle I had growing up and what things were. And I was like, cool, I can have that same kind of lifestyle. And it's exactly what you said. People, society expects you to have everything figured out by the time you're 30 with the house and the job and the family and whatever. But I think we all have to stop and take a look at, well, is that really what I want? Is that really what I'm prepared for? Because I look back and I'm single at this point, and I would look back and I think, okay, well, why haven't I met that person for me yet? And why am I still single? Why am I not married? Or why do I not have a family yet? But I look back and I'm like, there's no way I would have been ready, because I look at all my past relationships and I was like, well, I wasn't ready to let him into my heart, or I wasn't ready to change my ways, or there were still things that I was working on. So am I ready now? I don't know, but I'm coming at it from a different perspective now. I'm just, instead of trying to force a relationship to fit, I'm seeing what it feels like to be together, as opposed to being like, well, you have to fit this perfect box, which is how I was running my life. I was like, Kate, checking all the boxes, but I've dated guys that have checked all the boxes, and I've worked jobs that have checked all the boxes. But is my heart happy? Not really. So, yeah.
Yeah. And like, I get a lot of that too. I've been single since like 2016, and I don't regret it at all. And like, I honestly feel like we need to promote more of like people staying single in their 20s for at least a few years, because you really aren't ready for someone else until you've gotten to know yourself and you've connected more with yourself. And if you're constantly jumping from one boyfriend or girlfriend to the next, like, you're never giving yourself that space to really just understand you and what you really want. um
Well, sorry to interrupt. I think that's
no.
also kind of like, I don't think you should broad base it and say, okay, well,
Hmm.
everyone should spend time alone, because I do understand the growth, but there are certain people that just find that person and they just
Yeah.
meant to be. So I understand it, but I don't think you should hold yourself to a standard of like, well, that's the definition of happiness.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean though. Like, it's like for people who it works for, like, some people meet their sweetheart in high school and they get along great and they're able to work through things together and grow together. And then for some people, like they just need that space for themselves. And there's a lot of like it all becomes habitual, right? So we take those habits we kind of learn starting out, we take them into our adult life, and um sometimes those habits just don't work for us anymore. And um the only way to break a habit is to change what you're doing. So like it just is that kind of, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, it's not working, then do something different. And sometimes that just means giving yourself that time and space.
Well, and I like to think that, well, I think that everything is interconnected. Every single part of your life is interconnected. And so for me, when I was working in oil and gas, my personal values got so skewed because of the industry and how there's the people that I was surrounded with. I wasn't holding true to myself anymore. So the men that I was attracting were deep down were not the same, what's the word? We were not on the same energetic level because I thought that they were what I wanted. So that's what I was manifesting and attracting. But really, deep down, I was so unhappy that I was attracting the wrong people into my unhappiness, if that makes sense. So now that I'm out of it, I'm attracting different people that I'm a lot happier around.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially you attract what you put out. So if you believe that you want um a certain kind of person in your life, and like whether it's true to you or not, you're going to attract those people. So like you said, you've had this list and you had people who checked all the boxes, but you weren't really happy. And it's more, you needed to change your list, because what you believe should be on the list maybe wasn't necessarily what you really needed deep down. It was just, it's so much just letting your belief systems be fluid and letting them grow and shape differently and expand and just explore and see what works for you and what doesn't. Because yeah, like I've known so many people who just, they believe things are a certain way and life needs to be a certain way, and they have this very cookie cutter idea of this is how it's going to be and this is how it's laid out. And um if that works for you, then great. But if you are doing that and you feel empty inside, then you need to look beyond it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is logically you think, okay, this is what's going to make me happy, whether or not it's because society or your family or you just think, okay, this is what's going to make me happy. We get stuck in our mind of what we think is going to make us happy, but we forget to listen to our body. And it's a lot of what I run in my women's circles and what I'm going to be running in this event next week. It's about disconnecting from that mind, that ego, that logic saying, okay, money's going to make me happy, a house is going to make me happy, this and that, and coming back and being like, okay, what is actually making my heart happy or my soul happy? And it's weird because sometimes it's exactly what our mind thinks is going to make us happy, but sometimes it's not. And it feels almost counterproductive to follow that intuitive nudge to say, quit your job. Something greater is going to be there. You might not make the $30 an hour, but you're going to be so much more fulfilled that it's not going to matter that you're only making $20 or $25 an hour. But it's having that strength to know you and follow that intuition to guide, like to go in that direction.
Yeah, and like I'm kind of at a point in my life where I think if I stayed single for a few more years, like I'd love to just get a van and travel, and just like I want to go down the West Coast and like see some of the United States and that, and just have like pretty much nothing materially, and not having much money, and just kind of winging it. Because I went through a phase in my life a number of years ago where I pretty much had to sell everything that I owned. Um, and like it's hard to let go of the material things at first, but then once you do, it's so liberating when you're just like, I don't have all this crap to worry about anymore. But it also helps you to realize that the material things really aren't adding much into your life. A lot of it's about deeper connections and the material stuff's nice, but you should have a relationship where with it where if you have to let it go, you feel okay with it.
Well, and one of the lessons that I learned, if within the last couple of months of being laid off, was when I was making all that money. You know, I was making a big enough salary that I had a townhouse that I could afford without a roommate. I had a dog. I had Jeep payments. I could go on vacation, say, you know, like I had everything that I could possibly want. But because of that, the value of things became less because I'm like, oh, I have the money. I can buy it instantly. I can just go out and get it. I can do it. Whereas now I'm on CERB, so I'm obviously like it's a lot less than what I was making, but I now have to think and I'm like, okay, is it worth spending this money? Or I have to save and I have to work hard to get it. And the more effort you put into something, the more worth it is to you. Because if you don't want to put in the effort, that's fine. But I find now that, say, there's a book that I really want, and I'm like, no, I can't afford it this month. I'll wait till next month. It becomes that much sweeter because I had to work harder and I had to save and I had to wait for it, as opposed to instantly getting it and then it just sits on my shelf, or buying those clothes that just sit in your closet because instead of having it instantly, now I have to wait for it.
Yeah, and I was actually having a conversation with someone about this recently too, and how like our whole society, even right down to like our food supply, our water supply, um, we essentially like don't really need to work for anything. So I think the part of the reason why people struggle so much with not like I you can call it depression, but even just that feeling empty inside is because you're more grateful for something if you have to work for it. And essentially, like when you don't live your life where you don't have to work for anything, you don't have any gratitude. And um, everything you have and everything you do just doesn't feel fulfilling. I just really believe in like working for things. Like I would even love to be able to like experience living off the land for a couple months where like I had to come up with my own food supply. Like I there was no money involved and like I had to find food to eat, whether it's growing plants or hunting animals or whatever it is. Um, because I think like you would never take it for granted. You would never feel like unfulfilled in what you're doing because you'd be working for everything that you have essentially.
Yeah, and I think something that you deem to be worth it, you're going to put in the effort. And because it takes now that effort, you're really going to consider if it's worth it for you. And I'm not trying to say like different things to different people are going to be worth it, right? Like to what's that saying? One man's trash is another man's treasure. So just because it's not worth it to you doesn't mean it's not worth it to another person. But I think that's where have to come back into ourselves and really sit with ourselves and say, okay, well, what are my values and what's worth it to me? Like, what do I want? So, for example, would I want to live off the land? Probably not, because like that just seems like a little bit of work. Is it a cool concept? Hell yeah. And I think that's fantastic if you want to do it. So I think it's a little bit of give and take. And like, just because you don't think it's worth it does not mean it's not worth it. It's just that give and take.
Yeah, and like as a concept, it's entirely out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't say it's something that I really want or desire. It's just something I would love to force myself to do for the sake of experiencing it because I feel like I'd learn a lot from it.
Yeah.
Um, how I'm going to feel about it when it's done, I don't know. I might be like, oh, thank God I'm back in society, or I might be like, I'm never going back to society ever again. I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever actually going to do it, but it's something I've considered. It's good to kind of consider different things in your life, right? Like just ponder random ideas about whether they're good for you or not, like living out of a van or living off the land, or just even doing something you've never done before. Like really think about it. Like, is that something I want to experience or not? Um, and do what resonates with you. Like let yourself experience some things that are out of your comfort zone because we're we do like we're a little bit too comfortable sometimes and we just need to push ourselves to go places that we haven't.
Oh, for sure. And I'm 100% about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. It's something that I strive to do in my circles, and I ask, and when you're there, you don't, it's all about consent. So if you don't want to answer the questions, if you don't want to participate in the certain exercise, then of course not. You do not have to. But I always ask people to just be a little bit more vulnerable than they would normally, or just to step out of their comfort zone a little bit more than they would, because it's a safe space to explore those sides of yourself. And a few years ago, I backpacked by myself through parts of Europe, like London, Amsterdam. And for part of it, I was with a friend because she was living in London, and part of it, I was alone. And I realized I don't like backpacking alone, but I'm so grateful for the experience of going by myself to see if I did like it. Because I have friends and they love it. They would go travel the world by themselves if they could again. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try. And it was not my thing. But I'm so happy for that experience. I'm so glad that I did it.
Yeah, and like you gained, like essentially you gained a lot from the experience, whether like we learn whether we experience things that are good or bad. um there's something to be learned from it, but we need to let ourselves experience things whether they will be good or bad. And um that's just kind of an important message I try to put out to people, is to not be afraid to go try something. Don't be afraid to go do something. And don't be critical of yourself about whether you can or can't do it, or you can do it well or not, but do it for the sake of doing it. And don't do it for yourself. Don't do it for anybody else. And don't do it expecting any, I guess, like praise from anybody else either. Like don't go seeking any external validation on it. Like validate yourself internally on your experiences.
That's a tough one though, because we're raised in a society that values external validation. And so I agree with you 100% that you should do it for yourself and you shouldn't do it for other people. As we are caught up in that, wanting that external validation, whether it's from our parents, our friends, our family, right? You want to look out and have people say, oh yeah, she is successful, or oh yeah, I love her fashion sense, or he or she, whatever. And I think you have to work at it to validate yourself. I know, for like, I used to be that person that wanted only external validation. I was miserable on the inside, and those little drops of external validation would make me super happy, because I'm like, oh, cool, the people around me think I'm great, therefore I am great. And now I've been working the last few years to switch it and say, no, I'm great. And then I don't have to prove anything to them. And I find myself just in a lot happier place, because I don't care what they really say about me. Like, of course, some people's opinions mean more to me than others, like with my family or close friends. But if a stranger on the street would say something to me, I'd be like, okay, well, that's your own issues. That has absolutely nothing to do with me, because you don't know who I am.
Yeah, and like exactly like you said there, it's just about building that relationship with yourself and being at a point where it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And like essentially everything you do becomes judgment free, because you're not judging yourself. You are able to kind of validate yourself. And then if anybody else judges you, you can be aware that it's their thing. It's not you. It's um you're reflecting something back at themselves that they aren't happy with within themselves, whether it's not being open enough or that they wish they had done it. It's, I don't know, humans are tricky little creatures to kind of deal with. We all have our own stuff going on. But um I guess to shift it a little bit, what kind of took you the direction of doing like tarot?
Oh boy. It's really funny, because probably in high school, I would have been like, nope, nobody can tell me my future. That stuff's just all wishy washy, hoity toity. They're just going to tell you the same thing to everybody. And then I was in, yeah, probably would have been my early 20s. And I kind of started getting into it and going to see some psychics and going to see some tarot readers. But then I would always get so caught up in what they would say about my future. And then if it didn't come to pass, I'd be like, well, Why didn't it, you said this was going to happen. Why didn't this happen? So then me, being who I am, went and bought my own set of cards because I was like, I'll just tell my own future. It's fun. I don't need you. But then it would be the same thing. I would like tell my own future and I'd be like, well, that didn't work out the way I thought it would. But that's just, tarot's fascinating because I don't read for myself anymore, or very, very rarely, because you have your own judgments, your own ego, your own things that you have to look through. And I love reading for other people because one card can have many different meanings depending on who it's in front of. And then I also use my own intuition to talk to that person too. So I like it because I like helping people. And I just think it's so fascinating that how different it can be. The same card or the same three cards can be so different depending on who's sitting in front of you.
Yeah, and like I've personally had a reading from you before, and I was actually like genuinely really impressed with how you connect with it. Like it's not very often I have readings from people and I can feel like the energy flow going between them and the deck and like myself and everything else. And I was like, wow, like this is actually something you should be doing, because like it was just the way you were connecting with it. Um just absolutely fascinated me. But I don't see that very often from people. So it's a good thing you're doing it and you connected with it. Like I definitely feel like it's something you should be doing. Um, and do you have a website or anything?
I don't right now,
Okay.
but my Instagram is Love Lauren Rose.
Okay.
So you can follow me there. I do post readings. I think you've probably seen them. I do pick a card readings.
Yes.
So there's three cards, and then you kind of pick which one, or all of them, or two of them, whatever is suiting you, and then I post the reveal. But I did actually just create a Facebook page. It's called Divine Coaching with Tarot. So I'm going to start promoting it more because I do just genuinely love reading tarot and I love connecting with people and I love helping people. So yeah, there's just something about me and the cards that just, yeah, we just fit each other really well.
Yeah, like it's a tool, and it's a tool that works for you when working with other people. It really, I think, helps you to connect to them and to kind of help guide them where they're needing guidance. Because I feel like any time in my life where I've really felt like I need a reading, there's always been like one specific person that jumped out to me, and like I just really connected to that person at the time and got a lot from it. Like I find anytime I've kind of forced myself to go do readings just because like I don't get as much from it, like I really need to be in that space. And a lot of people, when they're reaching that kind of curve where things are starting to transition, they need somebody who they can go to who can give them that direction and give them some confirmation on their feelings and show them that deeper connection too. Because I think when you sit down with someone and you experience actually feeling somebody else connecting with something deeper firsthand, it shifts your perception on it, and it kind of shifts your perception on how you can connect with yourself and other things.
Yeah, and because based on my own experience, what I was saying earlier about the futures, and they would tell me my future and it wouldn't happen, and I'd be like, well, what the heck? Why didn't it happen? So because knowledge is power, and based on the reading you get, you can change your future so easily. And the example that I always give to people is if I put cards down and it shows me that you're going to get pregnant, for example, if you're a female, or that you have a partner or something, and they're like, oh hell no, we're not ready for children, then you're going to do everything you can, right, in order to not get pregnant. So therefore, you've already changed your future based on the knowledge that you were given today. So I don't read for people's futures. Like if they really want it, then sure, I might put in a couple cards, but I look at where you are now. I'll ask you where you want to go, or if you have anything present that's happening, and then we'll look at blocks, we'll look at things that can help you advice, because your future is so uncertain, and your future can become, it's infinite, right? You go right instead of left and your whole future has changed. So I don't like to look at that. And that's, again, coming back to the circles, it's all about coming back to being present, being here and being now, because the present moment is all you really have.
Yeah, that's totally true. The future is just the present that hasn't happened yet. So, and yeah, I see that a lot with tarot too, especially readers who really are big on predicting your future, is that you can look at it as if they predict your future and it does happen, essentially it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you believed so strongly that that was going to happen, so you made it happen on a subconscious level. And then there's again that other side of it where if that's not the future you want, that's just giving you the power to change it. um, because with any kind of divination, you can't predict anything that's set in stone. Like tarot readers can't tell you when you're going to die exactly because it would give you the power to change that. So whatever's meant to happen for you is going to happen for you, but then there's the things that you have choices on in life, and that's kind of where divination can give you that direction about, do you want to change direction? Is this where you want to go? And it's really just confirming a lot of what you already know deep down, but it helps to hear it from somebody else.
Well, and I think so. This is, now that we've talked about it more, I'm like, well, there's two kind of stories that come to mind about the future. So years ago, I saw this psychic, and she said that I would be working with women. And I was like, nah, I get along with men way better than I get along with women. Like, there's not a chance. And this was probably like my early 20s that I saw this lady, or like late teens, I saw this lady, and I was like, no. Like, I'm way more comfortable around men. Like, I don't see myself dealing with groups of women. And then here I am 10 years later running women's circles. So, like, did she see that in my future, or did she just plant that seed and then now all of a sudden I've worked my way towards that? I don't know. But then I've also, sorry, I read at a market a year or two ago now, and it was this lady, and her husband had been trying to get pregnant, and she was really upset about it. And she's like, I just need to know, like, is a baby in our future? And I was like, well, I didn't really want to read for it, but I was like, okay. And I pull out the card, and it was the Empress. And for those of you that don't know tarot, the Empress is like the pregnancy card. It's the abundance. It's the child card. And I was like, yeah, you're gonna get pregnant. Like, I don't worry about it. And then literally 3 months later, she was like, yeah, I'm pregnant. So did I maybe give her, did she stop worrying about it and just allow it to happen? Or did I actually predict it, that it was going to happen in the future? Who knows?
But it could be all of those things all at once, right? Like essentially, like everything's just everything's happening all at once. And yeah, whether it's predicted or it was meant to happen, or she, like you said, was able to relax, and it just alleviating that stress was enough to get her in a position where she could just surrender to it and let it happen when it was supposed to. Um, but then, like, you can look at the divine intervention. That did she meet you at the exact time where she needed the reassurance, because the time for her to get pregnant was coming up, and she needed to be able to let go of that worry so that it would just happen.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I think everything happens for a reason. And exactly like you said, divine timing, divine intervention, everything happens perfectly. And even though it doesn't feel like it's happening perfectly, I believe things are always happening for you, not because of you, not at you, not for, because, karma or whatever. Like, karma is a whole nother conversation that we can have another day.
Yeah.
But um, I think things always happen for you. And so even if it feels like a negative experience, I think there's always lessons that you can learn from it.
Yeah, and like you can't grow without having negative experiences, and that's, I feel like, something that we're not taught kind of growing up, is to, like, we're almost, it's almost like nobody even really talks about it, but we just witness other people doing everything they possibly can to avoid having negative experiences. So then we go, oh gosh, these horrible things happen, I need to avoid them. But you can't grow without experiencing things, whether they're good or bad. And you need to embrace the good and the bad that come with it. It needs to have balance, and then in the middle of that, like it's just being content, because like at some point you can reach a point where whether something good or bad happens, you're able to embrace it and just be content with the moment as it is, and just be aware that it's all temporary and it's going to pass. And then, you know, we had a conversation recently with my nana. Her husband passed away during the pandemic. He didn't have COVID, but he just had a lot of health issues, and he passed away, I think, back in April. And we were talking about suffering, and you know, someone had said to her something along the lines of, things happen, but suffering is how we choose to respond to them, and that's exactly true. um, if bad things happen and we feel like we're suffering, it's our mindset. We're choosing it to some degree, and um, it's letting ourselves be able to move past things and let things go and not hold on to them so tightly. So I've really recently, one of my new things I'm kind of just telling people I interact with, deal with, is to embrace the connections without the attachment. Don't get attached to your experiences. Don't get attached to what happens. Just embrace the connection with things while you're connecting with them, and then let them be after that. Um,
Well, and I think there's also a part of that is there is wisdom in your emotions as well. And so we have negative emotions, or we're told we have negative emotions like sadness and anger and grief, but I don't think those are negative things. And so if you look at sadness as suffering, then yeah, maybe you're going to hurt a little bit extra, but I think there's beauty in sadness, and I think there's power in anger, and in feeling them and witnessing them and learning the wisdom of them, you can grow so much more as a person.
yeah, like feel them and experience them and let them pass.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, just, I used to struggle a lot with anger, actually, and it was one of those things, like I held on to it so tightly. And you're right, there is power in it, and that's, I think, initially why I got so hooked on it, because it made me feel so much more powerful. But then after a while, it starts eating away at you. And then, you know, I had several moments in my, I think in my early 20s, where I would just think to myself, like, I don't even know why I'm angry anymore. Like, I have nothing to be angry about. Why am I even feeling this way? Like, there's no reason to feel this way anymore. Um, and a lot of that brought a lot of self-awareness on. But yeah, just let yourself feel it, and let it pass.
Well, and I think each emotion has something to offer. Like anger, for example, can show you where your boundaries are crossed. And that's why you get angry, because something happened that you were not okay with and you're angry about it. And so sometimes you need to go back and figure out the root of what boundary was crossed. And then sometimes it's just simply acknowledging that, yeah, okay, I'm angry. And then it's that saying, like, your emotions and thoughts are clouds, right? And if you just witness them going by and let them keep going, then you can keep living your life. But it's when you try and hold on to them and trying to bring them like into real part of your life, that's where the struggle and the suffering come in.
Yeah, very well said. Um, is there anything else you want to offer today? Is there anything else you kind of have on your mind, or
I
any?
don't think so. I kind of love how this conversation just like went all over the place. I love it.
Yeah, and that's what I like doing. It's extremely difficult to figure out a title for these, because I don't really have anything specific, but yeah, I just let it flow, and just, connect and let that energy flow, whatever comes up. Um, any any, like, I guess, final advice you would give for anyone who's kind of at the crossroads and starting out on their journey and kind of going through transitions right now?
That one, ooh, that one's tough because it's so easy to say, well, just quit your job, follow your dreams. But I understand there needs to be a blend of the logic and emotion. I don't think a lot of spiritual gurus will say, well, you have to get rid of the ego, you have to ignore the ego. I don't agree with that. The ego is here for a reason. It's here to protect you, it's here to help you, but it's when you let the ego grow out of proportion, then it becomes detrimental. So to me, it's all about coming back into balance. It's balancing the mind with the body, with the heart, and kind of all coming together. So I think that would be my advice, is if you're too much into the mind and you're too much into overthinking and can't stop analyzing and organizing, maybe it's time to come back into the body. And if you're too emotional and can't stop crying and like those, like I'm going to extremes here, then maybe it's time to go back and bring your mind back into balance. So I think there just needs to be a flow, and you have to be willing to go with the flow. So roundabout advice, but that's all I got for you.
No, that's fine. Like I 100% agree. Like there needs to be balance in everything. We need to take care of all aspects of ourselves. And I mean, I think of the ego essentially is our human identity. Like we're, um, it's almost like we're playing a character for a lifetime, and this is the character we are for this one, and we need to embrace that. And it's funny what you say about the gurus who tell us that we need to disregard the ego because they're the most egotistical people I've ever met. Um, uh, yeah, genuinely, the most egotistical person I ever met in my whole entire life looked at me one day and said, "I have no ego." And I almost burst out laughing in his face, and it was just not a good situation. I started kind of giggling a bit, and he looks at me, he goes, "What? I have no ego. There's no ego here." I'm like, mm-hmm, okay, you do you. Like,
Yeah.
oh, people are funny. They're entertaining.
If I could, my one piece of advice would be trust your gut. And if you can't trust your gut, you can't hear your gut. And by gut, I mean your intuition or your heart or whatever you want to call it, your body. And if you can't trust that, dig. Find out why. Figure out what happened to make you not trust it and start working your way backwards. Because as soon as you start trusting those little intuitive signs that you start getting, your whole world is going to shift.
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of like paying attention to your body too. Like the gut feeling kind of comes from, because you get that feeling in your gut when something feels off. So, if you are going into work every day and, like you said, you're in a job where it's stable and you make a lot of money and you're Monday to Friday, you're pretty settled, but you go into work and you feel like you want to throw up every day when you're going in there, um, you know, listen to that and evaluate that feeling because it's telling you that something's off.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go quit and start your own business. It could just
No.
be that that environment you're in isn't right for you, or that specific role, something.
Yeah, and just do the digging and help help yourself to get on track with connecting and just understanding yourself as best you can. And um, you know, don't be afraid, don't feel ashamed to feel like there's something you really want to do if maybe it doesn't line up with your beliefs or the beliefs of the people around you. Always explore, always maintain that curiosity that a child has and just exploring everything and letting yourself experience things and grow from them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sitting with me today, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. We'll see where this goes.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I will definitely be back.
All right. Sounds good, Lauren.
Okay, I'll see you later, Steve.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.